Now a debate between the Democratic candidates for Florida's 23rd District Congressional seat. Incumbent Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz and her challenger Tim Canova. CBS Miami's WFOR-TV hosted This Is Just Over 45 Minutes.
Now, from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede, and welcome to this special live one-hour edition of Facing South Florida. Now, the highly anticipated debate between Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and her primary opponent, Tim Canova. Wasserman Schultz is seeking her 7th term with the backing of President Obama and the Democratic presidential nominee, Hillary Clinton, while Canova is a first-time candidate and law professor supported by Bernie Sanders and his legion of followers who have pumped millions into his campaign. At stake, Florida's 23rd Congressional District, which includes parts of Broward and Miami-Dade counties. For the first time, both candidates agree to debate, and it will happen now on Facing South Florida. And we're looking forward to it. The rules are straightforward. I will be asking questions of each candidate and giving the other a chance to respond. There is no clock, but I will interrupt a candidate if they avoid the question or try to monopolize the time. So I would ask each candidate to keep their answers straight and to the point. We're going to hit a wide array of topics over the next hour on both domestic and foreign policy. But I want to start with questions of character that each campaign has had to face. And Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz, I want to begin by talking about the WikiLeaks issue. And there were two things about the WikiLeaks DNC's email release that caught my attention. One was the emails related to Bernie Sanders' religious beliefs and whether or not that could be used against him in the campaign. There were senior staffers on the DNC that did that put that out there, that suggested that this was an area that they could be used, or how whether he's Jewish or whether he's atheist. I know you hadn't seen those emails because you weren't on them. But first, would you agree that those emails were wrong? And second, what does it say about your leadership of the DNC that your senior staff felt comfortable enough to talk about a person's religion in that way?
Well, first, Jim, let me thank you and CBS 4 for the opportunity to be able to come in and talk about the important issues facing not only the people of Florida's 23rd Congressional District, but of the United States of America. It's been a tremendous privilege to represent the people of this district for the last almost 12 years, and I look forward to continuing to ask for their support. On that question specifically, not only have I condemned the exchange in that email, I mean, I share Bernie Sanders' faith and would never condone anyone suggesting that we question or strategize about questioning someone's faith. In fact, in that email exchange, a staffer apparently specifically said that they knew the chairwoman would not be okay with that, which I absolutely wouldn't have been. So I absolutely condemn and condemned that email exchange, and that person is no longer working for the DNC.
But what does it say that they were able to do that? That they would even feel free enough to send an email like that? Well, is that the culture you created there?
Of course not. Look, I'm very proud of my tenure at the Democratic National Committee. When the President of the United States asks you to do anything, it is a tremendous honor, especially when you've been asked by the President to watch his back, help bring him across the finish line. I was a key part of helping President Obama get reelected in 2012, and the work we did to prepare for Hillary Clinton to be our nominee and then make sure that we could get her elected president is absolutely critical to advancing the issues that are important.
I just want to say on WikiLeaks for a second.
But let me just specifically say, let's remember what happened at the DNC. The DNC suffered a 21st century Watergate. We were the victims of Russian espionage who stole private emails and our data and then gave them to the organization.
But it wouldn't make it, you're not suggesting that if they were just kept secret that those emails would be okay.
Well, no, what I'm suggesting is that it likes Sony, who suffered the same fate, and that, you know, we have had a lot of cyber attacks and an increase. There's no organization that, when their private emails faced the bright hot spotlight, private emails are just that, private emails. But of course, let me just remind you, in that email exchange, The staff on that email exchange specifically said they knew the chairwoman would not be and I would not have been.
Well, I'm going to bring Tim and Professor CANOVA in a second, but here's an email exchange you were part of, which dealt with your opponent. It does appear now very clear that DNC staff from the emails were coordinating with your campaign staff in terms of monitoring your opponent's movements, even coordinating statements that the campaign was going to be released was being run through the DNC staff and its advisors. Is that appropriate? Is it appropriate for you to use DNC resources to monitor your opponent?
Let's be clear. This is the 7th time that I have asked voters of the 23rd Congressional District to support my candidacy and for the privilege of representing them. I know how to run my own campaign. I didn't need anyone to help me. We've done just fine. I've won every election where I've been on the ballot. I would hope that staff who I work with would be interested enough, care about me enough, and be interested in my political success that they would try to be involved in a way. But at the end of the day, there were not only no rules broken, but that type of intangible effort on the part of the political. Jim, let me finish my answer, please, because you asked a question and you need this answer. That type of intangible, incidental activity is completely legal. It follows our rules, and there was absolutely no violation of the rules or the law.
Professor CANOVA, I'll give you a chance to respond now.
Well, thank you. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for hosting this debate and thank the Congresswoman for agreeing to this debate. Those WikiLeaks email disclosures do show a pattern of monitoring the campaign. I appreciate what the Congresswoman is saying, that she's won every election. However, she's never had a contested primary. A contested primary perhaps is a little unsettling at this point. It is clear that there were DNC staff that were using DNC resources to monitor the campaign. What I found most troubling in the WikiLeaks disclosures was actually the discussion about the email from the Congresswoman to Chuck Todd asking that Mika Brzezinski of Morning Joe give an apology. I think that's this kind of, and it's a pattern. On May 18th, there were 2 staffers of the DNC that were talking about suppressing a story on MSNBC as well. I just think this doesn't show a real commitment to free speech and open discussion.
I'll give you a quick chance to respond, but then I want to come back to him and start talking about some of his issues.
The people of Florida's 23rd District, who I've had the privilege of representing, they know that the issues that are important in this campaign that will decide who it is and that they'll decide on who it is that will best represent them focus on who do they know will continue to go to bat for them on creating jobs, on protecting Social Security, on making sure that there's a strong voice standing up for Israel.
No, we're going to get to all those issues.
But my specific response is that we have an election that is going to be decided in the next 2 weeks, and it will be decided and should be decided not on the content of private emails that were stolen by Russian spies, but on who is best suited and the most prepared and has the most experience to represent this district and be their voice.
May I interject? May I just respond and say that nobody cares about these emails right now.
Well, let me. All right, that's a Bernie Sanders show.
I'm not sure why we're
I just
talking
want to
about
agree
them
with the Congresswoman. I just want to agree with her and say that there are much more important issues.
So, Professor, I want to
and I look forward to talking
but
about
I want to come back to you for a second because I want to talk about. I want to give a little bit about our understanding of you.
Yeah.
You've only lived in this district since 2012.
Well, I've lived in South Florida since the mid-1990s.
Yeah, but off and on.
Excuse me.
But off and on.
Excuse me. I moved down here in the mid-1990s for a teaching job at the University of Miami. I've lived in South Florida for a total of 7 years. My family has been down in South Florida for decades, and I've been visiting for many years. I'd like to know how many years somebody has to be living in this district or in South Florida to be considered a Floridian.
Well, let me ask you this. You've only registered as a Democrat in the last year. You're running for the Democratic primary in this case. Why have you only joined the party in less than 12 months?
If I may correct you, I'll say this. I've been a registered Democrat for longer than Debbie Wasserman Schultz has. I was working on Capitol Hill for Paul Tsongas, the late U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, as a legislative aide when my opponent was still in high school. I've been a registered Democrat for more years. It is true that I registered independent for one election cycle And quite frankly, it was from dissatisfaction with this Democratic Party. A feeling, you know, please, the Congresswoman has spoken for a while. It was a feeling that the Democratic Party had moved away from me. It had become much more corporate dominated, quite frankly, under the Congresswoman's leadership at the DNC. And I felt the frustration that millions of people around this country have felt with the Democratic Party. And I'm very proud that I made a decision to re-register Democrat and to fight for the Democratic Party.
You've raised almost $3 million, most of it from small donors.
Yes.
Can you sit here and tell me right now what percentage of your donors come from outside of Florida?
Oh, I think about 10% come from within Florida, and we have far more donors in the state of Florida than Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz does.
And how many from within the district would you say have contributed?
I have not broken it down and analyzed that.
I guess I'm trying to understand is, are you really just a vessel for the basically the anti-Debbie Wasserman Schultz people around the country, the Bernie people who are so angry at her that they want to basically use you as an instrument to attack her? You're less a candidate than you are a revenge cycle for Bernie Sanders.
I don't see that at all. You know, if I had a different kind of politics, I would not get this kind of support nationwide that I have. The fact is, I've had a career for many years, for decades, working as a scholar, an activist, and both writing and working for change within the financial system. I've got a national reputation and have for many years.
Well, I just want to ask you how well you know this district. Do you know who the mayor of Southwest Ranches is?
I'm not going to play that game. No, I do not, and I'm not going to play that game. I do know that Southwest Ranches was the site of a proposed.
Jeff Nelson, by the way.
Very good. Thank you very much.
He's also the assistant principal at Cypress Bay High School.
I do know who my students are at Nova Southeastern University, and for the last 4 years, I have taught hundreds and hundreds of students there. I have spent more time in this district in the last 4 years than the Congresswoman has. I've seen on her website that she's had 70 events here since November. That's about 2 events per week.
All right, I want to bring her in.
You know, I didn't finish making a point about Southwest Ranches. You brought it up.
You want to talk about the prison? We're going to get to the prison.
I do want to talk about the prison.
We're going to get to the prison in a second, I promise you. But go ahead.
Jim, I've been a lifelong Democrat. There isn't one minute since I have been a registered voter that I have not been not only a Democrat, but a liberal Democrat who's not afraid to say it out loud. You know, the term progressive is thrown around, and that's the popular term used now. I'm a liberal. I embrace the L word. And not only have I represented this community in the State House, in the State Senate, and now in the United States Congress, I've raised my family here. I have spent more than 30 years in Florida and 30 years in South Florida. If you don't mind.
Okay.
I have deep roots in the community. I've knocked on thousands and thousands of doors, been in the homes of my constituents.
I need to move on. I need to, just for time purposes.
And that is a huge difference.
I want to come to you on money.
Do I get a chance to respond and say this, that Hillary Clinton lived in New York for very little time when she ran for U.S. Senate. And as far as trying to say that I have not been civically engaged, as my opponent has time and again, it really is an insult to teachers everywhere. President Obama and Elizabeth Warren were both law professors prior to going into politics.
Well, we're going to get to more, but I have to move on to another topic that I wanted.
The reality is my opponent has not been involved in the community at all.
Let me go to a topic.
He's not a registered Democrat from when he got
here. Hold on one second.
And that's what voters need to know.
I want to talk about money in this election. Let's talk about the money in this election. You have made as a cornerstone of this campaign that you believe that she is tied to Wall Street money that's affected her views on everything from payday lending to for-profit prison and Southwest Ranches to opposing extension of Consumer Protection Board regulations.
Yes.
What is your evidence that you believe she's bought and paid for by Wall Street?
Well, let's
make that case.
It was PolitiFact checked by the Miami Herald. The Center for Responsive Politics has all of these statistics. And for her entire career, she has raised millions of dollars from the largest corporations and Wall Street banks. Even this year, she's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars through a political action committee. She's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from the wealthiest contributions, $2,000 or more. And she's got a super PAC that's spending crazy, like mad right now on her behalf. She's very tied to these corporate interests. I don't have a single corporate political action committee that has contributed to me.
Do you believe they control her?
You know what I think? I think that it's the culture of Washington. 60 Minutes had an episode on this not too long ago, that the average congressional candidate spends more than 30 hours a week dialing for dollars. And who are they calling? 30 hours a week. They're calling wealthy folks. That's where the money is. If you are dialing for dollars 30 hours a week in, week out, you start to adopt their viewpoint. I think that's what's happened with the Congresswoman. I think her politics have shifted a lot over the years. I think when she was first elected many years ago to the State House, she was a much more progressive and liberal. Now she's just liberal and not as progressive.
Congresswoman?
You know, I'm very proud of the support that I've had, that I've been able to attract throughout my entire career. What I'm also very proud of is that I have been a strong supporter of public campaign financing for all campaigns for my entire career. I'm a co-sponsor of a constitutional amendment that would overturn Citizens United, which was the worst, and I agree with President Obama, that was the worst Supreme Court decision ever handed down. It has allowed far too much corporate influence when it comes to providing contributions for candidates. We should make sure that the playing field is more level, and I have consistently supported that view. My opponent wants to run away from the fact that over 90% of the support that he has financially is from people outside the state of Florida. I have deep roots in this community, 24 years of a record of accomplishment and service to this community, raised my family in this community, and earned the support of my constituents again and again because they know me. They know that I've gone to bat on the issues that are the most important to them, and they know that they can count on me and that I've had their back.
One of the issues that your opponent has raised was your support in 2011, and I think we have actually the letter that you and Senator Bill Nelson signed supporting the for-profit prison to be built in Southwest Ranches. Was that support in 2011 a mistake?
First of all, let's be clear on what that center was. That was an immigration detention center. It was not a prison. And so I know that but there's a big difference between an immigration detention center and a prison. There are prisons all the way out.
But it was a for-profit entity that was going to run it.
That was actually sought by the town of Southwest Ranches. The town of Southwest Ranches supported and made the arrangements with that company to locate a immigration detention center. They had an agreement with ICE and with the company that was going to build that center.
You then later came out opposed to it, correct?
Let me be clear. I was doing what I always do, which is when I have a municipality come to me and ask me for my help, of course, we take a look at that issue very carefully, and we do what we can to facilitate their request.
Was it a mistake to send that letter, in hindsight?
No, it wasn't a mistake to be able to try to assist. This was an important economic driver. Southwest Ranches, let's keep in mind, has almost no commercial tax base. They only have about 7,000 people that live in Southwest Ranches, and so this was an opportunity for them to be able to generate revenue and also have a low impact.
I need to bring him in, then we need to take a break. Go ahead.
I would like to.
A low impact facility like a detention center.
Let me bring him in.
Does not going to house criminals.
Let me bring him in. Go ahead.
I would like to get a word in edgewise at this point. It was a bad decision, and for-profit prisons and for-profit detention centers are not a good idea. Florida leads the country in for-profit detention centers and prisons. We should not have a permanent lobby that has an incentive to be locking folks up. As far as I'd like to answer the question about where my donors come from, I'm very proud that I have a national donor base. My opponent wants a national donor base and has one herself. She does direct mail all over the country. She seems upset that suddenly I'm doing very well at the game that she was doing as far as raising money nationally from small donors. And the reason I have a national donor base is because my opponent has been a leader nationally, and her leadership has been seen to be a failed leadership. And that's why I'm very proud to have the support of Americans all over the country, and these are working Americans, nurses and teachers.
I got to take a break here. We're late for our first commercial break. We'll come back, we'll pick up, we'll do more. We'll be right back with more of this debate. Welcome back back to the debate between Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and our primary opponent, law professor Tim CANOVA. Professor CANOVA, let's start with you this time. I want to talk about the issue of drugs, and I want to eventually get to the marijuana initiative that's going to be on the ballot. But in looking at your website, I see that you wrote something on there. You said with regard to drug policy, that you favor decriminalization of certain drugs and that the goal should be to let adults make their own decisions as long as they are not harming themselves and others. Let states and their voters decide on their own drug policies. What drugs are you talking about that you'd be open to decriminalizing?
Well, certainly marijuana. That's the one that is sweeping this country in some states. I do think voters should decide that issue themselves.
What about other drugs like heroin or crack or methamphetamine?
I'll say even hard drugs like that should really be treated as a public health issue. It doesn't make sense to be taking addicts and locking them up and not treating the illness itself.
So you'd be okay if a community wanted to decriminalize a hard drug like heroin? That's their decision.
Well, I think we need to have a national policy on some of the hard drugs to make sure that we have the funds to treat it as a public health issue. And this has been the trend in many states, not just to decriminalize marijuana, but to try to start treating heroin addiction and cocaine addiction as public health issues. It doesn't make sense to be locking folks up for this.
Congresswoman, 2 years ago, you opposed and criticized the medical marijuana initiative that was on the ballot. Are you supporting the current initiative that's on the ballot?
Well, I look at this issue as from the standpoint of being a mom and a cancer survivor. Certainly as a mom, and I have 3 teenagers, so I want to make sure that that when we take a look at how we deal with marijuana policy, and I also support decriminalization. I don't think that we should be locking up people for small amounts of marijuana. Certainly dealers of large amounts of drugs should face prison time, but we need to make sure that we are investing in drug rehabilitation programs and diversionary programs.
But this medical marijuana initiative, are you supporting it?
And then as a cancer survivor, and I've talked to many cancer patients and parents of cancer patients. My friend Elaine Geller lost her daughter to cancer, and she benefited from the use of medical marijuana. But I'm continuing to take a look. The concern that I had in the last election was that, and I'm glad to see that the supporters and the sponsors of that amendment have tightened it up a little bit to address some of the concerns about prior loopholes. We want to make sure that people who truly need it have the ability to get access to it.
What is it that you're waiting for before determining? Because it seems some people will accuse you of not wanting to state an opinion before your election for fear of alienating John Morgan or others who may come out against you.
I just recently voted to make sure that veterans have the ability to get access to medical marijuana. So I'm certainly, I have a public position. I support the use of evidence-based medical marijuana, and I'm glad to see the Obama administration just made a decision to allow for more research to be done. I share President Obama's opinion that we need more research to make sure that medical marijuana is evidence-based so that we can make sure
you support medical marijuana as well.
I do. I support it.
What I don't support is legalizing drugs like heroin and other hard drugs. That's not responsible. It's dangerous.
Do you think what he was suggesting is irresponsible?
I think suggesting that legalizing hard drugs like heroin and methamphetamines is not a public health issue by any means.
I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
There's a difference between legalization and decriminalization, and anyone who's been involved in the drug reform movement knows this. And what I'm saying is it shouldn't be criminalized. We should not be putting addicts in prison. That's very different from saying legalize the entire trade.
Let's turn to the economy.
Yes, please.
You support a $15 an hour federal minimum wage.
I do. I do think. I do think there should be some exemptions and subsidies for small businesses.
Tell me how we get there. How, as a member of Congress, because I think you'll have some opposition in Congress, how do you get that to pass if you're a member of Congress? How do we get to that $15 minimum wage?
Well, listen, there's a whole big agenda, a progressive agenda for jobs for all. It's going to take a lot of heavy lifting in Congress. It's going to take a lot of people speaking up and working hard behind the scenes. So, you tell me, how do you get to $15 an hour minimum wage? Anytime that there is
I'd be happy to tell you.
Every time, yeah, you've got to get it through committees, you've got to make the arguments to other members of Congress, and you've got to galvanize support, including among working folks. I've got the support of big unions that have backed me who want $15 an hour minimum wage. I'm sure that they'll be making the argument on Capitol Hill as well. The Communication Workers of America, National Nurses United, Plenty of labor folks, plenty of working folks want this. It's overdue to have a $15 minimum wage.
So how do you get it done?
You take a look at Walmart, for instance. Okay. This is a company that pays its workers so little that a big percentage of them are on food stamps. And where are they spending the food stamps? The largest recipient of food stamps is Walmart. While the Walton family becomes super rich, owns more wealth in the bottom half of America, and doesn't get very highly taxed on it either. Now, these are subsidies for wealthy folks. These are the arguments that have to be made. I don't hear my opponent making these arguments very much at all.
All right.
Well, then my opponent has just not been listening, because I have consistently stood up on behalf of the working people, stood side by side, fought side by side with the working people of this district, which is why I have the support of more than 50 labor unions, not only across this community and across the state, but across the country. I am a co-sponsor of the legislation that would create a $15 minimum wage. And Jim, what we need to do, you asked my opponent, how do you get this done? And he didn't have an answer for you because he's not quite sure. This is how you get it done. You reach across the aisle. Number one, you help make sure that we can take the majority back in the United States Congress, which is something that I have worked on for every year that I have been in Congress. I've supported and invested and campaigned for electing other Democrats, not just myself. I don't just focus on myself. I know that to advance our agenda, we have to be in the majority. My opponent just became a Democrat a year ago, and I have been a Democrat every year of my voting life. We also have to make sure, though, that we're reaching across the aisle. It's important, and I've made efforts to make sure that I could work with Republican colleagues.
Are you not too polarizing a figure, though, to be able to work with Republicans?
No, on the contrary. What I have done is I've made it a point, like, for example, starting a bipartisan dinner with my colleague, who I don't agree with on almost anything, Dan Webster, and regularly sitting down for no reason other than to get to know each other better at dinner with Republican and Democratic colleagues.
I got to bring this.
Thank you. I would like to get into this. I'll say this. The 50 labor unions that my opponent has the endorsements of, not a single one of them even sent me a questionnaire. This is an endorsement process that's very rigged, quite frankly. A questionnaire, a screening process hasn't existed. As far as growing the party, she hasn't grown the party. She can talk about reaching over the aisle and having a dinner party is real nice. But I'll tell you, under her leadership at the DNC, the Democrats have had historic losses. We now have I should say the Republicans have the largest majority in the House of Representatives in 83 years. And it's the same pattern right here in South Florida. You see, we are in the bluest district, in the bluest county, with some of the lowest voter turnouts. This should be a blue state. It shouldn't be a red state the way it's been. Under her leadership, she dismisses the fact that somebody who was registered independent for 2 years, re-registered Democrat. Does she want to grow the party? Does she want to invite independents to cross over and become Democrats? In the past 2 months, 3 months, we have attracted thousands of Republicans and independents who have re-registered Democrat to vote for me right here in this district. And she laughs and dismisses that. This party has to grow. While she's been in office, it gets smaller and smaller, and we lose more and more elections. I haven't seen her pick up a finger and help local Democrats running against Republican incumbents right here in South Florida.
So I think we should probably ask Mayor Judy Paul of the town of Davie whether I have lifted a finger to help Democrats, or Brian Koletka, or Nan Rich, or Marty Keir, who's running for property appraiser, and who I also helped get elected to the State House and to the County Commission. There are countless Democrats, not only in Broward County, not only in Miami-Dade County, but across the state of Florida and across the country, who I have spent my time not only focusing on electing myself, but I've been in the trenches working hard to elect Democrats all across this country, including and especially helping to re-elect the first African-American president, Barack Obama, who I'm proud to have his support and the support of the next president of the United States.
But she's unable to talk about the historic losses in the House and Senate under her chairmanship.
Let's turn to Social Security. You've made Social Security an issue, and you've accused her, and this in one of your ads that you have running on TV says, my opponent refuses to support an increase in benefits for Social Security.
That's right.
What's the basis for that, John?
Well, I'll say this. She put out a press release just a couple of days ago pointing to 6 bills and a House resolution that she has co-sponsored that would raise benefits, and I applaud her for that. She co-sponsored these in June and July. 6 of the 7. Oh, 5 of the 7, excuse me. The other one was in April.
God.
Well, this is the truth. And I'll tell you this, there's the Supplemental Security Income Program administered by Social Security. It helps the poorest, neediest, struggling seniors and disabled folks all over the country. And in South Florida, in Miami-Dade and Broward County, that's 125,000 senior citizens and disabled who live on $11,700 a year or less.
So why do you think she would not support an increase?
She did not co-sponsor that bill. I published a piece in the Miami Herald a year ago calling on the Florida delegation to sponsor it. She still hasn't co-sponsored it.
Jim,
I've worked with folks. Excuse me. I've worked with folks in this community, Justice for Aging, for instance, who have lobbied her office, and they were told that bill doesn't stand a chance in the House because of Republican opposition,
right.
And that's why we won't co-sponsor it. Elizabeth Warren authored and co-sponsored this legislation in the Senate. My opponent still won't co-sponsor it, and the 5 of the 7 bills that she is trumpeting, she sponsored in June and July.
Congresswoman?
Jim, the people who I have represented for all of these years, the 117,000 senior citizens, 90,000 of whom are on Social Security, many of whom only have Social Security as their sole source of income, they know that this argument is silly. They know that I've been on the front lines fighting day by day, side by side against Republican attempts to privatize Social Security. When George W. Bush was president, that was the mandate that he said he had after he was reelected. And he made it his mission to try to privatize Social Security. I stood in the breach over and over with my vote and my voice. I stood again and again, and I've co-sponsored countless bills, including a very important issue to our seniors, which is making sure that when it comes to a cost of living adjustment, which so many of my seniors have come to me and been concerned about the fact that they keep getting cut off from getting a cost of living adjustment, and that's because the formula, let me just finish this, please. The formula that is applicable to whether a senior gets a cost of living adjustment is off. It doesn't measure.
All right, I want to bring him back in.
I'm a co-sponsor. No, I'm a co-sponsor of the legislation that would change that formula so that we could make sure.
Right, let's bring Professor CANOVA.
And we've researched this. She became a co-sponsor in June and July of 2016. That is the truth. You can look it up online. It's right there.
Very, very clear. And this is
her record is clear that she.
Argument
it's not
that is
silly.
completely
To 125,000 senior citizens, to 125,000 senior citizens in Broward County and Miami-Dade who are looking for an increase in their supplemental security income. It's not a silly argument. We've been waiting for Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz to co-sponsor this. She still hasn't done it. So, she came around and co-sponsored 5 pieces of legislation. They put it up online and patted themselves on the back. They should be thanking me for having a primary challenge to get her to get on the right side of that issue as well as payday lending.
Let's take a break here. We're going to come back. We've got more issues to get to in the debate between Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Professor Tim CANOVA. Welcome back. We continue our debate with Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and law professor Tim CANOVA. I want to turn to Israel for a second because I think there's some areas of contention maybe between the two of you. You both support, as I understand, a two-state solution when it comes to a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. But I want to go to this from your website, Professor CANOVA. Any peace settlement must respect and safeguard the human rights of both Israeli and Palestinian people. This will require difficult compromises by both sides. I want to just start with you by asking, what specific compromises do you think Israel needs to make at this point?
Well, I think both the Israeli side and the Palestinian side will have to decide for themselves what the compromises are. I don't think it's to be foisted upon the Israelis by the United States government at all.
Well, clearly you believe that there needs to be some compromise on the part of Israel, but you don't know what that would be?
I've got my ideas, but I would not
pulling back on the settlements?
I would not foist it upon the Israeli government whatsoever.
But you want the U.S. to use its power to pressure the Israeli government to make those concessions.
Those are your words, not mine. Those are your words, not mine. I have spent a lot of time in Israel. I grew up in a blended family. I have a Jewish stepdad for the past 40 years now. I've lived in Israel for many months, worked in Israel, traveled around that country, and traveled around the region. And I've been there half a dozen times. I've studied there. It's a complicated situation. I would love to see a two-state solution, but it cannot be forced upon either side.
Congresswoman?
Jim, I'm proud to be the first Jewish woman to represent Florida in the United States Congress, and I take that responsibility very seriously. I believe that we need to make sure that the United States-Israel relationship remains strong and that the United States goes to bat to do what we can to protect Israel and stand by her side.
But do you believe there needs to be, he's saying that there needs to be some concessions on the part of Israel in this process, compromises. Do you believe that Israel needs to give more?
A two-state solution needs to make sure that it results in a strong and secure Jewish and democratic state living side by side in peace with an independent Palestinian state. And what is of utmost importance is Israel's security, which is why it is disturbing that my opponent has been anything but certain when it comes to his position on Israel. He's taken 3 different positions in the last 8 months, and he supports, and if you can look right on his website, he supports disarmament in the Middle East, including for Israel, which anyone who supports Israel understands would jeopardize Israel's security. I sit on the Appropriations Committee. I'm a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, on the State Foreign Operations Appropriations Committee, and I spend every day fighting for Israel's security.
I certainly don't appreciate words being put in my mouth.
Well, it's on your website.
I have said on my website that I support, yes, I support disarmament in that region, and I actually never singled out Israel whatsoever. I would not be talking about Israel as the problem.
Israel is in the Middle East. Last time I checked.
Excuse me. Saudi Arabia is the 4th largest military budget in the world now. I am specifically speaking about Saudi Arabia and Iran. That's where this bloodshed, this cycle of violence is coming from. It is not coming from Israel. It's coming from the Sunni-Shiite divide within the Middle East.
Well, here's what you wrote.
Yes.
The U.S. must do everything in its power to reverse the militarization of the region, including full diplomatic efforts to negotiate a general disarmament for the entire region that includes nuclear, missile, and conventional arms reduction. To my knowledge, Israel is the only state in that region who has nuclear weapons.
Well, I'll state categorically right here that I was not referring to Israel. I am a strong defender of the state of Israel. I've been actually critical of the Iran nuclear agreement for specific reasons that it doesn't help Israeli security in many ways. Let's
talk about the Iran nuclear agreement for a second, because I'm confused on your position with regard to that. Would you have voted for the Iran nuclear deal or voted against the Iran nuclear deal?
When the question is asked as a hypothetical, would I have seen classified information, that's when I had said, who knows? But quite frankly, I will say right here that that was not a good agreement for a couple of reasons. First of all, Iran is the biggest funder of Hezbollah and Hamas. To release $100 billion in assets right away without doing it incrementally is what I found to be dangerous and unsettling. And quite frankly, my position is the same of dozens of other Democrats who voted against the agreement.
You sent out a flyer that said, that was headlined, "In challenging times, Israel needs true friends in Congress." And it cited Ted Deutsch, and it cited Louis Frankel and Chuck Schumer, who were against the Iran deal. And then it separates, and we've got it up on screen now, Debbie Wasserman Schultz on the other side. What I don't understand is, how do you criticize her for her vote if you're not willing to say you might have ended up voting the same way if you knew what she knew?
Well, first of all, her vote has been condemned by an awful lot of folks who think she wasn't looking out for Israel's security, and that has been my position the entire time. And may I say also this, that as head of the Democratic National Committee, she held up a letter of support of that agreement. She stopped it from going out. She's the one who waffled and played Hamlet for weeks.
All right, Congresswoman?
As the head of the Democratic National Committee, I led the charge to make sure that we had the strongest pro-Israel plank in our history, and that we added anti-BDS language to make sure that the Democratic Party's position was very clear, that we strongly stand with Israel. And let's be clear, my opponent has been mealy-mouthed and waffling about his position on Israel from day one. Israel needs certainty. Israel needs somebody like I have been, who has stood resolutely with her. That's why the disingenuous flyer that he sent out with referring to my colleagues and friends, Ted Deutsch and Lois Frankel, who support my re-election, who spoke out against him and asked him to stop using their name in his materials, because they know that I have been a strong and staunch supporter of Israel.
Let me ask you this as it relates to Israel's security. The Iran nuclear deal will provide $1.8 billion of assets for Iran that the U.S. will transfer back to Iran, 400 million of which was just delivered in a cargo plane that's now become infamous from Donald Trump and the rest of it. Can you sit here right now and guarantee, can you guarantee that none of that money will end up financing Hamas, Hezbollah, the Taliban in strikes against Israel? Will not that money end up hurting Israelis and possibly American soldiers in the Middle East as well?
I mean, forgive me for correcting you, but the $400 million was the result of a court case that unfortunately the United States lost and that we were required to return by the courts to Iran. That had nothing to do with the Iran
still
deal.
The 1.8 billion.
It's what it is that those were monies that were Iran's monies and that they were not allowed access to as a result of the sanctions being levied to make sure that we could keep them from becoming a nuclear state. The Iran deal allowed the release of those funds, and Iran, since the finality of the agreement, has been fully compliant. I wanted to make sure in voting for that Iran deal, which I spent more time researching and sat in the White House situation room, met with our ambassadors in the P5+1 countries, and made sure that I knew that agreement and understood it backwards and forwards, that we put Iran from being 2 to 3 months from nuclear breakout to now 15, 20, and 25 months.
Can you guarantee that that money, that $1.8 billion that's part of the Iran deal, won't be used to finance terror against Israel?
What we know is that
But can you guarantee it?
You can never guarantee anything, Jim.
May I interject?
No, you may not. What we need to do is make sure that we continue to strongly watch over and make sure that agreement remains fully implemented, which it has. Iran has been fully compliant, and now they are nearly 25 years from breakout. And what we also have to make sure now is that we can turn our attention, and what the Iran deal has allowed us to do is turn our attention to going after Iran for their terrorist activity, for making sure we crack down on sanctions when they engage in their ballistic missile violations.
You know, I will repeat what I said earlier, that this is a region that needs disarmament. Yet, I support the memorandum, excuse me, I support the Memorandum of Understanding for a 10-year military assistance program for Israel. There was a House resolution offered by Ilyana Ros-Lehtinen. My opponent has not co-sponsored it. 110 Democrats have. I support that. No one is more committed to the state of Israel's security than me. I have lived there, I have worked there, I've had friends who have been killed there during the Intifada. I will not bow to anyone. That language about disarmament was specifically directed to Saudi Arabia and Iran.
All right, we only have a couple minutes left.
Israel is in the Middle East, Jim.
My frustration,
if you disarm, you jeopardize Israel.
My frustration is that this deserves an hour-long debate. And my frustration with this debate here is that there are a lot of things that we didn't even get near touching. Now, I'll tell you this, the Southern Christian Leadership Council and America TV, which is the largest Latin American outlet in South Florida, have already today made invitations for further debates between us. The African American and Hispanic community makes up 50% or more of this district. I challenge my opponent to debate again on these issues. These are constituencies that have been all but ignored in many ways by our representative here, and I think there needs to be specific debates that address their issues. As a law professor, I have to deal with students every day that are graduating deeply in debt, facing a tough job market, and paying high interest rates. They're graduating into one of the lousiest job markets around, and she doesn't want to admit this. The New York Times had a study. It says for this millennial generation, 18 to 34-year-olds, into their 30s, these folks are more likely to be living at home with their parents than starting families on their own and living on their own. And it's even worse in Hispanic and African American communities. This is a jobs crisis. It needs to be addressed.
He's asking you for additional debates.
Well, let's be clear. When it comes to the African American community, I'm proud to have the support of the Congressional Black Caucus, 45 of my colleagues who represent the conscience of the Congress. They know and support me because I have gone to bat on the issues that are important to the African American community, on civil rights and civil liberties, on fighting for justice, on making sure that we can expand, not constrict, access to the vote, making sure that when it comes to criminal justice that we have fair laws that really reverse the mass incarceration that too many African Americans have faced and whose lives have been devastated about. As far as having additional debates, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to spend time talking about the important issues today, but we are two weeks from the election, and I'm looking forward after today to continuing to reach out to the voters across my congressional district, and that's what I'll be focused on.
Okay, we're going to stop there, and when we come back, closing statements. right, we're going to now go to closing statements by a flip of the coin. Professor CANOVA will go first. Professor, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I appreciate being here for this debate. It's frustrating that there's so many issues we never really got to cover. I've talked about my opponent's support from big corporate interests. She's taken money from Wall Street banks and she supported predatory payday lenders. We never got to speak about that. She's taken a lot of money from big sugar companies. She hasn't done much to solve the problem of the blue-green algae tide that's threatening Florida's waterways and even our aquifer. We didn't get a chance to talk about that. It's clear there's so many issues that need to be discussed and debated, and the people of South Florida really want more debates. This election is really not about Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and it's not about me. It's about the kind of democracy we want to have in the future. I'm very proud of the campaign that we are running. I'm very proud of the fact that we've got so many donations from all over the country, but also from all over this state and the district. We have more donors here in the state of Florida than she does. She can talk about inside endorsements, but we've got the people on our side. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is for corporate powers, corporate interests. I'm for the people. Thank you.
All right. Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Jim DeFede and CBS 4 for the opportunity to join you this morning. I want to thank, most of all, the people of Florida's 23rd Congressional District, who I've had the privilege of representing for the last 12 years. It is the greatest professional privilege of my life, and I am so proud to represent our community and be your voice in our nation's capital, to have lived and worked in this community and raised my family here, seen so many of you on my son and daughter's ball fields, in Publix, making sure that we could stand up on the issues that matter the most to you, creating jobs, protecting Social Security, expanding access to health care for 20 million people, and as a breast cancer survivor, making sure that young breast cancer survivors have the opportunity to get the information they need. I'm proud to have the support of President Obama and Hillary Clinton, our next president, and I look forward to the privilege of continuing to represent you in our nation's capital and ask for your support on August 30th. Thank you so much.
All right, I want to thank both the candidates for coming in. This is an important part of the democratic process. I'm glad we were able to make that happen. Now, some important dates for you to remember as we count down to primary day. Election day statewide is Tuesday, August 30th. Early voting begins in Miami-Dade tomorrow, August 15th, and continues through Sunday, the 28th. Early voting begins in Broward next Saturday, August 20th, and also runs through Sunday, August 28th as well. Now, for more information, you can turn to the Florida primary or anything else. Go to our website, cbsmiami.com, campaign 2016. Also, if you missed part of this debate, it will be posted online, cbsmiami.com. It will also replay today at noon on our sister station, My 33. Now, I think I've got about 1 minute, so let's do a quick bonus round.
All right.
All right, just 30 seconds. Do you favor lifting the embargo against Cuba?
I favor incremental lifting of the embargo only to the degree that there's liberalization of politics and political prisoners in Cuba.
Do you believe we should lift the embargo?
I think a relationship with the United States should be earned, and Cuba needs to engage in a lot more human rights reform before we take that kind of step.
Okay.
We're in agreement on that.
We're in agreement on that. You're also in agreement. You're both pro-choice?
Yes.
Correct? Yes. You both support equal pay for women?
Yes.
You both support... let's see, I got a whole list of
immigration
things.
Reform.
Immigration reform, you're both on the side of it. Immigration reform?
Yes.
So those are important things. It's basically the issue of where the influence of money is. Yours comes from small donors. You believe that hers come from larger?
Yes.
It's a fascinating debate.
And the massive difference in experience and roots in this community.
I wouldn't call it massive difference when you've got a president of the United States who has a background like I did as a law professor.
Let me ask you real quick about fracking.
President of the United States who supports my re-election.
Would you both support a ban on fracking in the state of Florida?
I would.
You would?
I think we need to strongly regulate fracking and make sure that we protect our environment in the process.
So you're open to fracking as a possibility in Florida?
As long as we have significant regulation.
Vote yes on the solar initiative on August 30th.
Absolutely, we agree on that.
Solar initiative? Fracking will have more. All right, thank you very much. This has been a special edition of Facing South Florida. You know, it's been fun. Well, I like doing these things. We can do more at any time you want. We'll be right back, or actually we won't be. We'll see you next Sunday. Have a good day.